Let's end by discussing some of the similarities and dissimilarities between Hinduism and Buddhism. So these come from the same place, around the same time, and they share lots of influences. It makes sense that there's lots of agreements and similarities between these two views. We saw one huge one, which if you missed a big thing, which is that the aim, it's in Hinduism, it's called moksha, in Buddhism, it's called nirvana. And again, this is not quite totally shared by all Buddhists now, but historically, we've been trying to escape a cycle of death and rebirth, samsara. That's common in both of these traditions. Not only that samsara exists, and not only is it governed by karma in both of these traditions, that is where and how you're reincarnated, but that the goal is to escape that thing. That is fundamental to both of these traditions. In Hinduism, it's called moksha. Buddhism, it's called nirvana. It's the same thing. We're trying to escape this cycle of death and rebirth. And in both traditions, we do it in the same way, largely, at least again, historically with Buddhism, even though that's changed over time with some traditions. We do it by trying to end desire, trying to become detached from the world. And in both traditions, knowledge is incredibly important to that. You have to see beyond an illusion. You have to see reality, right? And the illusion in both cases is very strong. Now, what the illusion is different in these cases between these two religions. But in both cases, the world presents us with an incredibly strong illusion, so strong that most people will struggle to overcome that illusion in a single lifetime. But knowledge of reality is the knowledge that the illusion is an illusion, and seeing reality beyond the illusion. And that's very hard in both of these cases. Ethically, both traditions center on doing no harm. So that's another major agreement. So now on disagreements, let's start with where we just left off. That is, what constitutes the illusion that the material world presents to us. So in both cases, the similarity is that there's an illusion, and it's a very strong illusion, and we have to get beyond that illusion. We have to gain knowledge of reality. In Buddhism, that illusion is changelessness and permanent identity, that the world presents to us as if there are things that don't change, or at least don't change for some protracted period of time, right? I'm standing here, you're watching a video feed of me up in this corner of the screen, and it seems like I'm the same person that started the video. It seems like, to me, my back porch is the same as when I bought the house. Although even that, now that I say that, I've made changes to it. My yard seems to me the same as it's always been. But again, things have grown, things have died, especially with drought. Dogs have dug holes, kids have dug holes. There have been many changes. But even something that seems to not have any surface changes we saw is changing all of the time. Its parts are changing, even if it seems to be staying the same. Okay, so the illusion on Buddhism is the illusion of changelessness and the illusion of permanent identity. Because as we saw, we won't rehash it all. None of those things are true. Things are constantly changing, and nothing has a permanent identity. I'm a different person than I was at the beginning of this video. Those are the first two marks of reality. Whereas on Hinduism, the illusion is diversity or plurality. Monism is core to Hinduism. So Hinduism is committed to monism, that is, that there is no division or distinction in reality. Everything is one. And that's the reality. And the appearance or the illusion of the world is that there are many things. There's a microphone, there's a person, there's a rafter, there's a yard. But really, there's only one thing. Those are all identical to the extent that they exist. Whereas Buddhism seems to be committed to pluralism. And I'll say why. Seems like if you think that things are constantly changing, well, the mechanism by which things change, this was implicit in everything that I said, the mechanism by which composite things change, and a composite thing is just something made up of parts. The mechanism by which a composite thing changes is the changing of its parts. So I'm a composite thing, you're a composite thing, you're made up of parts, not only large-scale parts, but those large-scale parts like your arm and your hand are themselves made up of parts. And down to this really cellular level, and even the cells are made up of parts. but you change over time because your parts change. That is, you lose certain parts, you gain certain parts, you're losing cells, you're gaining cells. And so it seems like if you're going to endorse the claim that there's no permanent identity because of this constant change, you've got to admit that there are distinct things changing themselves in and out. There are parts of wholes, right? That's part of the very concept of a composite thing. And we just saw the concept of a composite thing being made up of parts is core to the Buddhist idea of change. So it seems like whereas Hinduism is committed to monism, Buddhism is going to be committed to some kind of pluralism. Okay, so another big difference is that Hinduism is committed to the self, the existence of the soul. Now, there's some complication around this, but they do say Atman exists. The complication is Atman is Brahman. That is, you are identical to everything, but still you exist. Buddhism, as we just saw, says you don't exist because nothing really exists permanently. Okay, Hinduism, much more comfortable with rituals and priests. Some forms of Buddhism, as we just saw, not all, are going to be anti-ritual and priest. And then finally, this is a really big difference. Buddhists tend traditionally to be very explicitly anti-gods, anti-metaphysical speculation. That is, they do not, it's not that they're atheistic explicitly, it's that they do not think that it's worth talking about. I think that's maybe the best way to say it. When I say metaphysical speculation, I mean speculation about the structure of reality. And so if we started arguing with them about composites and parts and wholes, they would probably say, like, this is not worth talking about, even if they do have a view of it. And I, as I just argued, I think they do implicitly. They don't think it's worth talking about. And the reason is there are these Buddhist stories about this where, you've got someone suffering some very serious physical ailment, right? They have terminal cancer or their arm has been cut off and they're bleeding out, and they're sitting there trying to ask, whether God is one and three persons and how that works, right? The Christian concept of the Trinity or something like that. And the Buddhists, the point of the story is that's not the important thing right now, right? There are far more important things, which is not to say that there's not some truth to those questions, those metaphysical questions, or those questions about the number and nature of the gods. It's that the Buddhists remember the third mark of reality. The third mark of reality is suffering. Remember the Four Noble Truths. They're all about how to avoid suffering. Buddhism is entirely focused towards reducing suffering in the world. And so, since suffering is so pervasive, to spend large swaths of time thinking or debating or writing about these speculative questions is just not what we should be doing. And it's totally insignificant in comparison to suffering and the attempt to reduce suffering, especially since that's possible, right? You can reduce suffering with great effort. So put all of your effort towards that instead of putting all of your effort, or any of your effort really, towards these speculative questions. Again, that's not true on Hinduism. You do get religious speculation about these sorts of things, the nature, the number of the gods, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's where we'll stop. Those are some big differences, but as we saw, there are also some very serious similarities too.